Good grief. Oh, hello everyone. Let me actually switch over here. So today I'm actually joined by, you want to close that, Rodney?
What am I closing?
Your chat window there.
Is my chat window open?
Or
Oh,
the message in...
There we go. That.
Well, the message in Skype. Because it's, it's showing in your video now. That's weird that it's picking that up.
Yeah. Is it gone?
No, it's still there.
It's not there. I closed it.
The chat?
Yeah, I closed the conversation.
Oh, okay.
Again.
Oh, I don't know. Weird. Okay. Maybe it was on my side. So I'm an idiot. There we go. Everyone knew I was an idiot already, though, so it's all good. Anyway, so if you guys don't know who this is Rodney Littles. So you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Yeah, so I'm currently a Xamarin developer. I've been a .NET developer for about 15 years. Worked on large-scale API integrations long before microservices was the buzzword. Found mobile, found Xamarin, fell in love, and about 3 years ago, I guess, 3-4 years ago now, I got the opportunity to watch Evolve and Michael Stonis talking about Reactive UI and how you should build better mobile apps with Reactive UI. So I immediately got on the Google box and started down this long, dark road of reactive functional programming, which I still haven't seen the light of day from since.
It is funny how that kind of happens. You know, I remember all of a sudden one day I get this message from this weird guy named Jeff, and I'm like, what? Who's this Jeff guy? And he starts talking to me about Reactive UI and how I need to check it out. And you know, it's been an interesting adventure, and it's been actually a lot of fun, kind of bringing a lot of Reactive UI and Prism together. So in kind of talking to you off stream, it sounds like, you know, you've really enjoyed this as well. But, you know, I think that they work so well together. I mean, there are certain things that Reactive UI and reactive programming just does so incredibly well. And then you take that and you mix that with a lot of the things like the DI and navigation with Prism, and it's just magic. I really wanted to thank you first and foremost for taking the time to put together this sample and kind of help out the community. So just absolutely awesome job. All right.
You're welcome.
So apparently I have to reload Visual Studio for the third time. Every once in a while it gets really angry at me.
Does that mean that you just killed the live share too?
No. It's one of those. So my setup, I have. I guess I gotta move for my camera now. So the setup I have, I've got the MacBook Pro, and then I've got a Windows in a boot camp partition running with parallels, and then I have my. And then I basically I have my user profile kind of mapped over as a network drive, so that way I can work from either Visual Studio on Mac or from Visual Studio. Either way, I can still work on the same code. And everyone, like, I can't remember what it was, but it was maybe about a month and a half ago. It was like sometime in November. They did an update to Visual Studio, and now any single time you have like some sort of file change with the network share, it just goes haywire. And it's like, oh, I got to reload all this. And, you know, sometimes it just does the project, and other times it does the whole solution. And sometimes it just, Visual Studio says F off, and, you know, it starts over. So it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it sounds like fun.
Yeah. All right. So why don't you kind of walk me through? So I've got the solution open, the Prism sample. So where do you want us to kind of start? Kind of walk us through this.
I guess we should kind of start at the beginning and kind of talk about some of the DI concerns.
Okay.
You you know, at the end of the day, a lot of functional programming is less about some of the quote unquote solid principles and more about kind of the functional aspect of things. So I know a lot of people in the functional community, they don't mind newing up view models at certain points in their code or using a factory to do those types of things. I come from a solid background, so I still prefer to have a true DI container. Reactive UI actually doesn't ship with a quote unquote true DI container. It actually uses the locator pattern. So it uses Splat as its service locator, and Splat was written specifically to be lightweight and fast. It is not supposed to be a full feature DI framework. So here we're using Prism's DI to tie in all of our, bits. Nothing really major here, but the main thing that I do want to point out is that in Reactive UI, not probably so much in Prism, we have this concept of an iView4, and the iView4 is what kind of ties a page or a view concept to a view model from a binding perspective. So we bind on WPF, WinForms, and all of the different platforms kind of in the same manner. So binding context, I think in WPF it's like called the dependency context or something like that. WPF people can yell at me later. And we use that, right? We use that to kind of to mirror those things up. So in this DI setup, you won't see as much of that because Dan explicitly wanted me to use Prism's DI. But I do have a kind of a spoiler. There was a tweet back and forth between myself and Dan about a week ago talking about why would you bring Splat to Prism? Well, Glenn decided he wanted to bring Splat to Prism. So now we actually have Splat.Prism, which brings Splat as the DI container to Prism, just like you would use dry IOC or any of the other IOC containers. So that's kind of the basic gist of it, and then kind of from there everything just kind of goes downhill. So I mean we can kind of get into the meat and potatoes, or we can kind of walk through I don't know, kind of the concepts that I put together. One of the things that I hate are these contrived examples, but I find that when trying to teach or trying to show something like functional programming, it's actually very easy to take a simple example and kind of blow it out of proportion. So let me see if the live share is actually following you. Are you where are you in the live share? 'Cause I don't.
Well, I'm nowhere at the moment. Let's see here.
That's why I don't see.
Yes.
So let's go ahead and go to the login page and the login view model. Let's try that.
So login page and login view model. Okay. Am I looking at the XAML? Am I looking at the code behind? What am I looking at?
Let's look at the code behind.
Okay.
Let's start there.
Okay. Let's take a look at what we have here.
Hey, there we go. Okay, so I can see what you're doing. All right, so the first thing that we'll see here is that we're not actually using XAML bindings. We're using Reactive UI bindings. So I get a lot of questions about whether or not you should use XAML bindings. What's the benefit of the XAML bindings versus the code bindings? I personally use the code bindings. Yeah, I know somebody.
Yeah,
for containers.
Yes. I know Brian is freaking out right now with this code behind.
Oh, I'm sure. So I'm not a XAML person. I didn't come from the XAML world. As a matter of fact, when I started writing Xamarin.Forms, I was writing Xamarin.Forms in code. Shame me later if you want. But the main thing that we'll notice here is at the end of every binding, there is this concept of a dispose with. Every reactive binding by default returns an iDisposable, which means it can be consumed by the garbage collector. What that dispose with does is allow you to tie together disposals to what's called a composite disposable. And there's a couple of ways to do that. I chose to do it the way I did it, but there's also this concept of when activated. So when a view model or view is activated by the platform, this activation logic will kick in and will manage your disposals to a degree for you based upon the activation and deactivation of the platform. Sometimes I like a little bit more control over things, so I don't always do it that way. But that view bindings is just a composite disposable that I put on the base class of the content page, which just abstracts reactive content page. That's a pattern that I use quite frequently. So you'll see bind is just a two-way bind. Bind command binds a command. One-way bind is a one-way binding. And then the fun part is going to be on line 32 when we talk about that when any observable.
Okay.
This kind of gets into the meat and potatoes of reactive UI. We always say that reactive UI isn't really an MVVM framework. I mean, it is. It's a full feature framework. We solve a lot of the concerns that any MVVM framework would solve, but most frameworks don't play nice in the sandbox together.
Yeah.
Hence why we're here. Dan and I sat and talked, and you know what? Reactive UI and Prism work well together because reactive UI doesn't force all of its concerns on you. It kind of lets you pick and choose. And these when any operators are kind of the basis of all that. These are just extension methods that you probably would have naturally written yourself were you to go down the path of using functional programming in a UI kit or a UI framework.
Yeah.
So basically, what that code is doing is basically just saying when the login command CanExecute value changes, do some work, and instead of telling it to do it, I'm just going to set up a case and I'm going to set up this function and declare what that code should do, and it's going to go do the thing at the time that it's ready. So it's kind of the gist of that. It's probably more in the view model if you want to go to the view model next.
Sure. So one thing I do kind of want to talk about briefly before we move on, like I know Brian is freaking out on some of this here, but you know, this is, I think, you know, just another way, like, you know, and in a lot of ways, this is actually cleaner to me than if you were to do this with like Xamarin.Forms binding in code. Certainly, you know, if you are a XAML, you know, person, right? Like, I'm going to prefer XAML bindings all day long. I know Brian prefers XAML bindings all day long. But, you know, if you're someone that wants to be building, you know, if you want to build this in code, I mean, like, what do you have to do for that, right? Like, it gets really kind of ugly, I think. So,
It does.
You know, like, I'm not sure where, like, what we have. Like, let's take a look at the XAML here real quick, because I think you did name some of the stuff. Like, what do we have?
Yeah, you have to use the X name
Yeah.
and give it an explicit name. Otherwise, you know, the bindings don't work.
Yeah. So, okay. So, and actually, I like how you have automation IDs in here as well. Something that pretty much everyone forgets to do.
So for the record, I stole this code from a login sample that Adam Pedley did like years ago.
Yeah.
But yeah, he used automation IDs, and he was explicitly teaching that in that in that blog post and in that sample. So I took that for that purpose because I've read it and learned a lot from it, and I wanted to point out some of those things.
Yeah. No, it is definitely helpful. Yeah. So you have your X name here. So I mean, this is not really magic. So I mean, we could, like, you know, we could come in here and we could say text equals binding username here, right? This would be the XAML way of doing it, of course. But all we're saying, like, is if you have username, so if we go, you know, what is it? Sorry, username, and then we wanted to set the binding, you know, now I have to say that we have an entry, and then it's the text property, right? And now I'm
impressed that you actually know that off the top of your head, because I would have to look that up.
Yeah, I do. I do crazy stuff, man. But now I either have to do the lovely magic string. So that, I mean, okay, I mean, it's about the same, maybe a little less technically. So I think there may be some advantages to this kind of binding instead, and especially with the dispose with, right? Like, I mean, you do get that there. So it's all, I think, about preference there. What, you know, who do you trust more for binding? Do you trust the Xamarin team that just broke their bindings when you set, you know, a command and command parameter? Just saying.
It's funny. I'm actually going to be chasing a Xamarin.Forms binding issue.
Yeah.
Later.
Yeah. And then they blamed Prism for it too. That was like the hilarious thing. They're like, "Oh no, it's because you're using delegate command. That's why you have a break. It's not Xamarin.Forms." I'm like, "Bro, you're passing the wrong element to the command. Like this is totally Xamarin.Forms."
Yeah.
The binding was right, by the way.
The buck at least once.
Yeah. I mean, the binding was completely correct, but they like closed the issue. They're like, no, it's Prism. I'm like, no, it's not. Anyway, so we were going to the view model, right? So let's take a look at this view model. All right, what do we have here? Walk us through here.
Okay, let me close this thing down and make sure I can see the whole thing. Here we go.
And Brian, hold on, sorry, Brian, they won't fix it in 3 or 4 years. That one they actually recognize as a regression. So I saw something. I think they're going to do some sort of hot fix or something for it. Anyway, sorry. Go on, Rodney.
No, you're fine. So what you see in the view model is more of that, good functional goodness. The main thing I think that we'll point out here is going to be different from most of the Prism users is that we're using reactive command. There's some fun stuff about this, but long and short, reactive command itself is an observable. The execution of the reactive command is an observable, and whether or not it can execute can take an observable. So I'll take a moment here and kind of talk about observables, because I know that some people have heard it, and the first thing they think of is, I use observable collection, and that means I know observables. I tell people like observable collection is the kindergarten of observables. And if you want to step up to, like the big boy leagues, you got to understand the iObservable interface. You got to at least know what a monad is. I can't tell you exactly what it is off the top of my head. I still have to look that definition up, but you have to know what it is, or at least heard Eric Mayer or Wes Dyer talk about it. And it's basically, I explain it poorly as a stream of events, and I know that a lot of functional people will tell me, it's way more than that. Yes, it is, but the easiest way to conceptualize it is it's basically just a stream of events that are happening. So you have some iObservable of some type, and that will stream out information every time a notification happens. So the way I explain it is on the iObservable interface or iObserver interface, there's an onNext, which I think is similar to the getNext in iEnumerator. Anyway, long and short, what it does is the onNext is basically the same as a dot invoke from a request handler, or from not a request handler, from an event handler. So just think of it as any time the event handler would do dot invoke, the observer is doing dot onNext, which means a notification is getting sent to whomever is listening to that event. iObservable. Yeah.
It should be iObservable, as I recall.
Yeah, iObservable, yeah.
Well, do I have to say out, or?
No, I don't think you do.
Oh, okay.
There you go. Yeah. And iObserver is the one that has the fun stuff. So the iObserver interface is where you get your onNext, your onCompleted, and your onError. So an observer has basically three commands that it'll fire off. It'll give you a notification onNext anytime anything happens. It'll actually give you a complete notification, and then it'll give you a notification if there's an error.
Okay, so we have onCompleted, onError, and onNext. So this onCompleted, it's just go do something. OnNext is we have
onCompleted says there's no more values coming.
Oh, okay. So basically unhook everything is the general idea on that?
Yeah, basically this is the end of the stream. You can stay if you want to, but we're going home.
I like that description. And then we have our onNext. So here's your next value. We have something that changed. And then onError with an exception. I think that's kind of self-explanatory, right? Okay. Cool.
Yeah, more or less.
Cool. So yeah, I think sometimes these dummy implementations, just to see what an interface is, makes it a little easier to visualize and understand. So yes.
and the whole monad part of this goes into the IEnumerable and IEnumerator interfaces, which we'll spare everybody that. You can go look that up. Channel 9 has videos for days on functional programming dating back to 2009, where Microsoft figured out this amazing thing called iObserver, which is basically just an implementation of the publish and subscribe pattern, or the pub sub pattern.
Yeah.
So let's jump into the navigation view model base real quick so that we can kind of talk through.
Okay.
Oh, there's still view model base. So let's go back one more, or go in one more to view model base, because inheritance is lovely. Reactive object. Reactive object is, I guess, the equivalent of what you would have as bindable base. It is the class that you inherit from to get change notifications and property change notifications for given properties on your view model. So there's some other additional syntax. We've got a Fody Weaver that kind of weaves some of that, but I explicitly did it in the view model so you could see what the full syntax looks like when the Weaver actually weaves. So we can go back to the login view model now and kind of talk through how that reactive object is used. So you'll see again that when any observable on line 34, the reactive object is going to start to surface change notifications. What the when any observable, when any value, and when any operators will do is look at a property that has change notifications, and it'll surface those change notifications as an observable. So explicitly, like line 34, we're saying is loading. We're saying anytime that the login button is executing, which is an observable, we're going to pipe that observable out to a property, and that way we can bind that property to the view, because of the way observables work, and they're kind of they're inherently asynchronous. You can't bind an observable directly to your binding engine for MVVM. So what you end up having to do is use this observable as property helper, which is on line 16, which basically converts an observable pipeline into a property for you. Functionally,
which line are we looking at here?
Line 17.
Oh, okay.
That private read-only observable.
Okay, right here.
That's some special magic that creates basically an observable that will automatically pipe the current value that's being notified out to a property that can be bound to the view engine. Okay.
So for this is loading, so we're gonna, looks like we're giving it an initial value of false.
Correct.
And then we're piping it over actually to, or we're notifying, I think, right? The is loading. So we have like this normal Boolean, like that we would normally bind to. And so
we are binding to.
Yeah. So we're effectively, we're just doing, I notify property changed for is loaded, using this observable, as, what is it? Observable as property helper. That is a mouthful, my friend.
It is. We've had many conversations about the length of that. If we could go back in time and change it, we would.
Of course. Yeah, sometimes it is what it is. But yes. So we have the observable as property helper. Okay, and then we're using the when any observable to look at the login command and it is executing property. So basically, and the is executing property on reactive command is an observable itself, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So basically, we're looking at this observable property on the login command, and anytime we get a change on that, we're going to go ahead and pipe that into this to property method here, or the basically update our is loading, right? So this actually, I think this to property is what creates our observable as property helper, right? So
it's the one that glues them together. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
So like the output of that, is the observable as property helper. So that's what we're ending up with. And so that's kind of how we're getting all this magic. And it's a little bit of magic, but it really is very helpful. And I mean, even though this is simple, I will say, like, in some of my projects where I have found this really, really useful, it's almost too simple in some ways when you only have a single command, right? But like when you have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 commands
Yes.
going on in a view model, and you start piping in multiple commands is executing, and now you're legitimately always controlling whether or not you're busy, because I've had so many things where it's like, there was that one edge case where you didn't accommodate for something and is busy got set to false while you were still actually executing. So this is actually really powerful.
That's a great point that you bring up, Dan. Like, that's kind of the beauty of this, right? Nowhere in further code down in the view model will you see me set the is loading value to true or false. I don't have to maintain that state. I don't care about the state of any of that. I can even say, if there's multiple commands here, right? And I have a loading command and I have a command that's going to do some other task. Let's say I've got to make a network call and I've got to make a local database call.
Yeah.
I can pipe in multiple is executings into that when in the observable. And now anytime any one of those notifications tick, it'll get piped out to my is loading, and my loading indicator can fire off, and it'll wait for both of them to come back, and maybe both of them have to be true, maybe only one of them has to be true. And I can do all of that without ever having to actually mutate the state myself. I don't have to say is loading equals true, finally, is loading equals false, because everybody knows every time you set that state, you, the developer, are mutating that state. You are responsible for that state change. But here, I'm not responsible for it. I'm just saying, hey, as long as I can trust that is executing fires when it's supposed to, I'm good. I'm good to go.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's fantastic. I really do like it. And I know that this has probably got to save you some grief, that you have this create from task.
Oh, God, yes.
Uh-huh.
Oh, God, yes.
Yes, I'm poking the bear intentionally on this one.
Which bear are you poking? Because,
Brian.
So the reactive command has static creators for create from task.
Yeah.
You can create from an action, avoid return, and you can create from an observable.
Yeah.
Observables are inherently respect all of the TPL, so you can await observables just like you can await a task. Tasks and observables sometimes don't play nice in the threading sandbox, so you have to be kind of careful, because the TPL handles threading one way, and when you're dealing with observables, instead of allowing the TPL to dictate what thread things are happening on, or better yet, you have minimal ways to interact with the way threads are handled in TPL. You have basically a Boolean value, right? True or false.
Yeah.
Configure await true, configure await false. When you're dealing with observables, you can actually schedule certain tasks to happen on different thread schedulers. We've got the main thread scheduler, which is like the UI thread. We've got a task pool scheduler, which basically is just a background thread processor. You've got the immediate thread scheduler, and I'm going to miss the last one because, of course, I just blanked out on it. But you get the point. There's more that you can do when you're dealing with observables when it comes to threading. So sometimes, like if you I know for a fact if you do like a task.delay or wait task.delay in a function and then try and execute it, like it'll do some weird nonsense with the framework. And that's just kind of a, hey, you're trying to schedule it using a different way of scheduling, and we don't really know how to do it, and you're mixing two different concepts. We're not gonna play nice. Come back.
Yeah. No, I mean, you have to have limits, for crying out loud. It can get complex for sure. So kind of walk me through real quick. So we have some other properties here in our login view model. We have password, username, pretty standard, right? So this all looks actually very similar to what we would do in Prism. So instead of just having that set property, it looks like you're using a extension method off of the reactive object.
Correct.
for this raise and set if change, but different naming, slightly different. I mean, the signature is exactly the same. Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, that's the part that's more or less standard notify property, right?
Yeah.
You can change the way the syntax rolls, but it's all doing the same thing at the end of the day.
Yes. Yeah. So that should still feel very familiar for people. And of course, here we have on navigated from, and so here it looks like you're just clearing out your username and password. But I mean, this is something that you might do if you weren't using Reactive UI, if you was just regular Prism.
Right.
So, and I think that to me is like the big take home that people should understand, right? Like, it's just like using Prism. Like that, you did all of the Reactive UI way of binding, but you don't have to do that. Like,
right.
Like you could just take this view model, like these little things that you have done in the view model here, and all of this could basically bind right to your view.
Correct.
So, cool. So where do you want us to go now? What should we look at here?
Okay. Well, so let's talk about kind of the CanExecute. Again, the CanExecute is actually an observable itself. So here you'll see another on line 26,
Okay.
25, 26. You'll see another when any operator, which is when any value. And what we're saying here is anytime either the username or the password changes, run it through this func and give me some value as to whether or not the execution of the command is true or false. So normally you would have to explicitly set whether or not the command could execute or whether or not the command isn't executing. Here, what we're saying is you give us an observable, and when that observable changes, we'll just light up the command.
Sure.
And the command will go. So I use, again, it's a contrived example, but how many times have you said, hey, the username has to be an email and the password length has to be at minimum 6, right? You can easily write a regex that checks that in your view model, and then just as soon as the user types in something that lights that CanExecute login to true, it'll return true, and the command will immediately become hot. So you can now click the command, whereas before you couldn't.
Definitely.
That's something that when I first started Xamarin.Forms was actually rather tedious in terms of, this can execute, this can't execute, when should it execute, when should it not execute. But now I don't have to worry about it. My command and my binding react to the state changes of my UI. So now the second my UI state is is correct, I can go ahead and execute the login. Definitely.
So, I mean, this is also very similar to like Prism's delegate command, where we can observe different properties. We can still have some sort of logic that checks like, hey, what can we execute or not? So it's that same concept where both Prism and Reactive UI have gone about the slightly different ways, but basically they both achieve what Xamarin.Forms couldn't with their command. Their command is kind of terrible. I'll say it out loud. I love the framework,
so
but
I'll take a moment there to say this, Dan. Yeah. Like I was talking to somebody a couple months ago, and they were saying, well, they're just going to use Xamarin.Forms stock MVVM, and I told them flat out, like, I would not wish that on my worst enemy, because there's like, you get binding, but that's kind of all you get is binding, and I don't even know. I wouldn't know how to go about building a Xamarin app without a proper MVVM. Layer.
So, I mean, I'll just show it real quick because I find it hilarious every time. And I normally don't get to show people what it would take if you wanted to use Xamarin.Forms as an MVVM engine, because this is disgusting. So, if we're going to do this, right, so we have, we'll say, view model. So what is their implementation? Is, what is it, bindable base, right? Or no? That's not wrong one. Bindable object.
Yep, there you go.
Sorry. I'm thinking Prism. Shocker, right? That I would think Prism. But no,
know,
so
right?
we have the bindable object. So now if I have, what did we have? These two properties for, what was it? Username.
Username and password, yeah.
Okay, and public string password. Okay. So now I have to come in here and I have to say public static read only bindable property username property, or I'll fix that so it kind of matches the same. Okay, and then I can create the property. Wow. Bindable property dot create, and now I can say username type of string, and then I can say view a view model, and I'll give it an initial value of null. And that was just for one property, and I'm not done. So let me do the other property now, right?
That's like extremely verbose.
So bindable property, password property, bindable property dot create, name of password, okay, type of string, type of view a view model. By this time you're ready to kind of slit your own wrists, but right, okay. So now I have to, of course, cast this.
Cast it.
So
yep.
Okay, and we have our password property, and then we can do set value, password property value. So I mean, this is the nonsense that we would have to do if you followed the advice of people like Brandon Minnick, who go around the world on Microsoft's dime telling everybody that you should use Xamarin.Forms as your MVVM framework. And why can he do that? Well, he works for them, so they pay for him to do what he wants, but he doesn't write real code. So he doesn't understand this is freaking ridiculous.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, that's a lot.
Like, and I haven't done anything with this. I mean, all that was simply to be able to go, I notify property change. That's it. That's all I've done with all of that code. And they go around telling everybody that Xamarin.Forms is an MVVM framework. I want to vomit. I digress. Anyway.
It's got a binding engine.
Yeah, it has a binding engine. That's what I use it for. I use the binding engine, and then I use a real MVVM framework.
Yeah. That's painful.
And then, my other favorite, right, is like, now what happens if I want to do something like, I don't know, if I wanted to execute some code when one of them changes, right? So now I got to come into my password property and say property changed, and I can do, on password changed, right? And I'll let it create this because it's too bloody verbose. I don't want to type it. And so what do we get? So now we have a static method, where I pass in the bindable object, so it's not even typed, and I get an object from my old value and an object to my new value. So I have to cast everything here. So just to make this usable now, like, I have to say, like, if bindable is view a view model, right? Of course, it helps if I type it correctly. Bindable. And now I can come in here and I can access, but I don't even know what the old value and the new value are unless I cast those two.
So yeah, like I said, I would not use Xamarin.Forms stock MVVM.
Yeah, it's not. It's terrible.
For pretty much any reason. My statement stands. Thank you for proving my point. You use a real MVVM framework, folks. It'll save you hours and keystrokes.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, this drives me crazy when I hear people, oh, well, I'm just going to use Xamarin.Forms for an MVVM framework. Like, if that's an MVVM framework you want to use, you're crazy. Like, because it's not a framework.
Some people roll their own. I mean, so I'm like, oh, okay, more power to you.
Brian's impressed I still remember how to handwrite all that.
Oh, I would have had to look all of that up, Brian. Like, there's no way I would have ever gotten that off the top of my head. I'm like, wait, how do you do that again? Because that's archaic.
It is. I write a lot of code, man.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
All right. I mean, what is that? Like, that's over 25 lines for nothing.
Right. That view model alone is almost everything that my view model does, and I'm explicitly using like return carriages where normal people wouldn't. So I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah, 25 lines for two properties. Yeah.
To literally do nothing when I got the entire view model done in 71 lines of code. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, you got, yeah.
Seems like a thing.
Yeah.
Seems like a thing.
I mean, who wants to maintain this? Like,
that's what we call in the industry job security.
Yeah.
Oh man, I'm sorry. That was a bad joke.
No, it's the truth. It is absolutely the truth. Anyway, okay.
Yeah.
So moving on. Sorry, I had to go there.
No, it's okay.
It's one of those things. I keep seeing things on Twitter, people saying nonsense, and I'm like, are you kidding me? Come on. So I had to vent that one.
It's okay. I understand your pain and your struggle.
All right, go for it. So where are we going now? What are we doing?
Let's go to.
Well, we never did look at this execute login actually. I'm just noticing. So.
Oh, how so?
So let's look at our execute login, like the actual implementation that you have behind your command, right?
Oh, okay, yeah.
So just a fun little, I think this is more of a fun tidbit. I can't think of a reason that you would do this for real code.
Which one?
So we have our observable return. You pass in a default unit and then do a delay time span from 3 seconds.
Yeah. So that's just me being cute. Candidly.
Yeah.
Like
I mean, it's basically
I'm showing the.
Yeah, it's effectively like what is it? Task.delay and then 3000, right? Like that's all it is.
Exactly.
Same
What
thing.
I told you earlier, task.delay plays really funky things with the reactive commands at times.
Mm-hmm.
I've had some unit test failures as a result of just that. So one of the things I was trying to show here was one that you can await an observable just like you can await a task.
Sure.
There's functionally no difference. Technically there's some differences, but that's magic that I don't want to get into. But also, I use observable.return unit default a lot of times when I need to return an observable, and I want to do some downstream work on that observable. So I can do like observable.return, and then I can do a .do statement, which just executes some action, and I can do a logging statement. I can do a function in there, and all of that will happen as a result of the return of this observable. So a lot of times you'll see like iObservable return type unit. That's a way to return a unit, and I just tacked on the delay to the end of it so that I could get my delay. The other way you could write that is if you took away the await at the front and put a subscribe at the end, it's the same thing. But I wanted to explicitly show that you could await the observable.
Okay. That's great though. So I just don't want people to think it's too magic there. Like, at least if they're watching. If they're not watching and all they do is see checked in code, then they can go look at the docs because you guys have a lot of docs.
Yeah, we do.
So, and then just like any normal thing, we have our navigation service we're calling Navigate. We're doing a absolute navigation here. So we reset main page with the navigation page, and then we have this NuGet package list page. So I'm assuming we probably want to go check that out, right?
Yeah, that's where we're going to get into some fun stuff.
Package, is it the list view one or package? Which one is it?
Oh, you're killing me, Smalls. let's start with the list detailed page code behind, because
Or
then we're going to get to talk about Pharmacist. So the list
the
page
package
code
list,
behind.
okay? Or you want the actual XAML page or whatever?
The code behind of the XAML page. Yeah,
Okay.
that would be.
So we're going to talk about Pharmacist.
Yes. So
We have some drugs
Brian's,
coming now.
this is where like the real wizarding happens.
Is that how you
Yeah,
guys
like
really
so
make all your money? Is that what it is?
Yeah, unlicensed pharmacist practicing under open air. No, that is not how we make the money, but this is how we make the observables. So I explained at the beginning that observables play nice with tasks, they play nice with events, they can model events, they can model tasks, you can use observables to model either. So one pattern that we do a lot of and is very useful in UI frameworks, have like a click event, a tap event, and you'll have some event handler that happens as a result of that.
Okay.
Oh, Pharmacist is the one thing you've been wanting to learn. Great. Well, here it is. So what we used to have, or we still have when we're deprecating, we had these reactive UI events packages, and we were using mono.Siegel to do some really funky magic, and take these UI kits and convert the UI kit event handlers into observables, right? So what Glenn did, probably at the beginning of last year, is he went and created an MS build directive called Pharmacist. It can be run as an MS build directive, a global tool, and I think there's one other way that you can run it. Glenn, don't yell at me too bad when you see this. But what it does is it basically scans an assembly and creates observable.from event on a given UI event. So your button click, your is refreshing command, all of these commands will now have events on them, and you can just subscribe to those events as observables and do downstream work. So instead of having to allocate and deallocate an event handler and who hasn't created a memory leak, it's funny, we actually don't use from event pattern anymore. We use from event because there's a performance gain that we found using from event, but it's functionally the same thing. What we do is we take whatever your UI event handler is, and we just expose it. Again, like I said earlier, the on next is the same as invoke. So when the UI kit would normally call the invoke on the event handler, the on next will happen on the observable stream.
Okay.
So what I can then do is I can do fun stuff like use RX operators like throttle or buffer to slim down the amount of actual notified property, or the actual notifications that I get, because those aren't notified property changes, those are event handlers. So I can slim down the actual events that I have to deal with. I can transform them using select. I can apply a set of functional operators to that event handler and then pipe it out to a command. I can subscribe to it directly. I can do whatever I want with it. And I don't have to incur the mental the mental drain of, hey, did I unsubscribe from that event handler? Like, how many Xamarin.Forms developers have gone and created a event handler and forgot to deallocate that event handler and created a memory leak as a result of it?
Definitely.
The beautiful thing about Pharmacist, the beautiful thing about using the observable.from event is it will automatically deallocate that request handler during that dispose with.
Okay.
On disposes.
Okay.
So
that was a lot. I'm wondering if everyone actually got everything that we just said there, or everything that you just said there.
Probably not. So go ahead and ask questions then, because I think that was a lot.
I'm trying to think where to even start on that. It was a lot. You're right. Brian zoned out.
So I've got live share. I can just type code in here and do stuff.
So yeah. Let's. So I think I need to. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
Of course, I'm VS Code, so I don't get IntelliSense. Observable.from event is going to then pass in. How does this work? I can never remember this off the top of my head because I just started using from event. I used to use from event pattern, but basically some event handler of some type, and then you pass in that type, and then you can create a downstream handler. This is probably not going to compile.
Well, you have a list view in this page, right?
Yeah, so I'm kind of showing what that dot events is doing.
Oh, okay. Well, I was going to say, do you want to maybe use an example of like if you were going to use this with the like in a list view event or something? That makes sense?
One time, I'm sorry.
So maybe show an example, like if you were going to use this with like a list view event or something.
So yeah, that's kind of what this code is showing, right? So on line 41, what we have is a actual list view, and this dot events is basically the Pharmacist wrapper saying, give me all the events that this particular UI element provides.
Okay.
So from here, you can look at, you see we use the item tabbed, we use the item selected, we're going into the refresh. And basically what we're saying is for any given UI element, give me all of the events that it surfaces, and I'll provide you an observable stream from that event handler.
Okay.
Right? So now from that, I can do different transformations on that observable stream. So from here, I can, as you see on line 43, I'm explicitly casting it out as whatever the binding context is for the view cell. And then I'm saying I want to explicitly observe on the main thread. So I'm saying, hey, let me look at it on the UI thread, and then I'm going to invoke a command as a result of that. So I could very easily do this with a this dot bind command, but I wanted to explicitly show the power of this, because one thing that I can do here is I can do what's called a dot throttle, and I can provide it some time span. I want to say it's going to be time span. 5 seconds. And what this will do is now say, hey, I only want, so for anybody that does RxJS, I was having this conversation the other week, throttle is the equivalent to the debounce operator. And what it says is, give me the events as long as the 3-second timer has not expired. So if another event comes through before that 3-second timer is up, I won't get any notifications. So like, let's say, let's talk about the text change event, right? Normally when people deal with the text change event, they have to write some really funky code to make sure that they only get text change events every now and again. Or you have to respond to every single text change event that comes from that handler. What the throttle operator says is, if they're still typing, don't even bother giving me notifications until they've stopped typing for half a second, 2 seconds, whatever the time span that you give it. So what that allows me to do is now, instead of responding to every single event handler, every single dot invoke, I'm only responding when there's a potential that the stream of data that I'm going to get is actually usable. And we'll actually see that later when we get into the actual search mechanism on this page. But that is kind of the power behind observables that you kind of get over the event handler. Is I can now use sequence transformation and time transformation on the events themselves, and only respond to events when I dictate that I'm ready to respond to them, versus having to respond to every single text change event.
Okay. So now this is at runtime, or I'm sorry, at build time, that Pharmacist is actually creating this extension right here, this bindable object events. Is that right? Okay.
So what Pharmacist is doing is it's going against the Xamarin.Forms list view, and it's saying, what events does the list view surface? What event handlers does it have? And then you do dot events, and item tapped is one of the event handlers.
Okay.
So now I have an observable stream from the item tapped, and I can then, now from that point forward, I'm dealing with an iObservable that I can use all of the functional operators on.
All right. So, I mean, we have to have, obviously, an event handler somewhere, right, in order to hook into this event. Now, it's all under the covers through this build time generated extension.
Yes.
All kinds of magic. Dude, like people go, Dan, you did all this crazy, like that is some crazy stuff that Glenn did. Like I'm like that's
So
yeah.
I
Like,
actually want to point that out. So like,
I don't know why.
there you go. Thank you. So yes, that's exactly what we're doing. We're talking about some legitimate magic behind the scenes.
Yeah.
I already thought RX was magic. I actually I started throwing RX into a production app some years back, and I had a boss literally look at the code and said, "That's black magic. Take it out." And I'm like, 5 lines of code got me what literally 200 lines of code would have gotten me. Like, no, I'm not taking it out.
Yeah, that would be like someone telling you to take jQuery out of your web app. See you later, Brian. But that'd be like someone saying, take jQuery out of your web app and just use plain JavaScript, It's like, why?
Yeah, pretty much.
Why?
So what Pharmacist does is truly magic. It basically looks at the UI. Or can we go back to the code generated?
Is that where we were?
The Pharmacist. Yeah, it's where we were, and then you moved away from it.
Oh, sorry.
I thought I'm supposed to be following you. Where are you?
Actually, okay. I really meant to follow you, so that's, yeah.
Oh, no. Well,
anyway,
it's
okay.
like the blind, right? So as you see, what we're doing is we're basically saying we're creating some extension methods, and events is just an extension method. It takes whatever the element is and it surfaces the events for that element. So to the point earlier, I'm trying to scroll down. So we were talking about the observable.fromEvent. So what we're doing is we're doing observable.fromEvent on the event handler with the proper event args. Oh, they probably can't see me scrolling over. Oh well. And
what line are you on, or what were you doing?
I'm on 308.
308. Okay. Somehow I think it got us out of sync. Okay.
It is.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm going to just start doing my normal functional thing. So I'm going to just start dropping code down like I normally would. I have a preferred syntax when I write functional code.
Sure.
I'm starting to get to the point where I like to have every functional operator on its own line. I know it's more verbose. I know all that stuff, but it's so human readable, and it makes like looking at the problem so much easier because it tells a very specific story. But anyway, all we're doing is basically giving you access to the event handler, and we just basically return the event handler from the event. And what this does is it actually provides the allocation and the deallocation of the event handler here on line 316. Yeah, there we go. So it's all taken care of for you. An iObservable returns an iDisposable by default, so it's very easy to clean up. Very little mess, very low maintenance from a developer perspective, where it's very easy for us to forget to do that minus equals. I can't tell you the number of times that I've had to go through a code base and find all the event handlers that are not deallocated. And this just makes it very simple. It's clean, it's neat, and all of this magic is generated from MS Build. So
yeah.
See, do I actually have access?
It's a great use case for MS Build. I like it. I'm impressed.
So you'll see here, or you're not following me. Come on, Dan. Give the program.
It should be following you. Like, I have it set to follow. Like, everybody on the stream can see right now I have it set to follow you. So if it's not following you, it's a bug.
Try moving pages and see
okay,
what
there
happens.
we go.
Is it following me now? Are we on Prism Sample.cs proj?
No.
Okay, well, go into Prism Sample.cs proj and just accept it.
Okay.
Doesn't like me.
Pharmacist MS Build. Okay.
Yes, and that is the key. That is the magic. You bring in this NuGet package, you bring it into your project, it will scan your assembly at build time, or at compile time. There we go, compile time, pretty sure. And at compile time, it will look at your entire event stack and generate whatever observables from whatever event handlers it finds. And that's the magic of Pharmacist. Candidly, it's something that I've told Glenn he's going to have to sit down and explain it to me with crayon, because Like he was starting to explain it when he first had the idea, and I was like, yeah, that's sounds like I need that tool, but I don't know how to do. I don't know how to do that.
It's in here somewhere. Where is Pharmacist? Good God.
It's right here on.
You guys have a
12
lot
and
of
13.
stuff in here that's like been updated very recently, because this was updated like 2 days ago, and I had to scroll way down. So,
Oh yeah,
yeah. So,
yeah.
uh,
We're pretty. We have a pretty healthy cadence on Reactive UI. Right now, we're in a bug
definitely.
squashing mode. So, like, we've been trying to clear as many bugs off our backlog as possible, but we're constantly updating things. A lot of that's probably some Dependabot stuff because we try and keep things up to date. But
Definitely.
we're always pushing new features. We're always trying to fix whatever problems we find. We report new things.
Uh-huh.
We try and be as proactive as possible and keep this community healthy.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that what Dan is showing right now is Pharmacist, and Pharmacist is like all the magic, none of the guilt. It's amazing. You should use it. You don't even have to take a dependency on Reactive UI in order to use it. You literally just have to take a dependency on Pharmacy, and it will give you all the iObservable fun with it.
So this is kind of what I thought, but so I know a little bit more about MS Build than I ever wanted to know.
Yep.
So one of the things that I have learned from doing the mobile build tools is all about MS Build and creating targets and tasks and stuff. So one of the things here, so we see that this is actually set to do before the target core compile. And core compile is kind of what's going to be called every time, and not just when you hit build, but core compile actually, believe it or not, does get called by, like, just to give you IntelliSense. So the IDE actually does use that target. And so when you have this in here, this is actually going to tell even IntelliSense that, hey, we got to go and generate the Pharmacist stuff before we even compile.
Yep.
So another kind of thing that is kind of worth understanding, and I'll probably have to get with Glenn to go over this as well. But one of the things that'll actually improve the performance dramatically of this target. So you get this for free. So you're gonna have to tell him to watch it so he can get the information. But actually setting setting inputs and outputs on the target will actually increase the performance, because it's probably very unlikely that you're changing which assemblies that you're referencing very often. Right? Like, it will happen, but it'll be very, like, infrequent. So actually, if he takes the list of referenced assemblies that he's taking as an input, and then takes that output file, that generated code file, he can actually do everything where it will only regenerate when there's a change to the reference assemblies. So this will happen one time and then won't change again until
there's an
actual change in the assemblies. Yep.
So I'm going to take that to segue into there's actually a functional operator that does a very similar thing. It's called distinct until change, and it looks at an observable sequence and says, "Hey, if I haven't changed, don't emit new values." So that's very in line with that concept. Okay, that's good to know. That's good to know.
Do I want to become famous? Ugh.
No.
I want a
No,
cabin. I want a cabin in the woods. That's what I want.
Man.
All right. So anyway.
All right.
So where are we going?
So yeah,
here?
let's go back and look at this this list view page code behind nonsense. Yeah, there we go. All right. So I think I need to go back to following you on the live stream, maybe.
So and I'll follow.
me.
Yeah, I'll follow you.
Okay.
And nobody tell the state of California that I have a plastic straw. I don't want the cops showing up at my door to arrest me for my plastic straw.
So you're still not following me. Go to the NuGet package list page. Yes, there we go. All right.
Where am I going? I am on the list
No, you're in
views,
the right
yes.
place. For whatever reason, it doesn't show me as. Am I not a participant? Oh, there we go. Okay, now it's showing me. So all that to say, Pharmacist generates observable streams from the events, and now I can do downstream work on them. So I explicitly use this syntax here to show Pharmacist and how it works, because it's a pretty powerful thing. If you're just doing observables, you don't want to use all of Reactive UI, you just want to use reactive extensions in iObservable, you can still bring in Pharmacist and just use the regular RX operators. You don't have to deal with any of the when any value. You don't have to deal with the reactive object. You can just use these bits. And that's kind of the main thing and why we're talking about this today. You can kind of use these bits anywhere you want. And Reactive UI doesn't dictate that you can't work with another framework. You can work with whatever framework you want. You can bring in Reactive UI and just use the parts that you want. So
Definitely.
we kind of talked about
and then
that.
we have this. I'm noticing you have this observe on, and you pass in the RX app main thread scheduler. Now, if you didn't specify that, and there are some, it looks like you're not specifying it. Is it just kind of whatever thread, or what's the deal with that?
Yes. So there's a lot of controversy in the RX community about observe on and subscribe on, because a lot of people will think that you're supposed to subscribe on the thread because everywhere you do this .subscribe method. So obviously subscription is the business. Subscribe on actually tells the engine to what thread to package and unpackage the subscription. Observe on basically says where to return to. So observe on is your equivalent to configure await.
Okay.
In the TPL or in the task parallel library for, and basically what we're saying is, hey, I explicitly want to observe everything after this operator on the UI thread or on the task pool scheduler or on the immediate scheduler, because I want to make sure and ensure that it runs on the UI thread. So in Xamarin, I believe it's like device.begin invoke on UI thread. There we go. Close to it. Main thread, maybe somewhere in there.
Which is not currently async, though. I think there's a PR open for that.
Right. Yeah, that's actually pretty sad. Because, why else other than... Anyway.
Not going there.
Asynchronous programming is the thing, and this is basically allowing me to schedule threads for listening. I can use many observe ons. I can only use one subscribe on, but this basically says that on line 44, when I observe on here, everything downstream of this will happen on the thread that I specify. So that's kind of what you see there. So this one I explicitly want to happen on the UI thread. The item selected I want to happen on the UI thread. Maybe the refreshing I don't necessarily want to happen on the UI thread.
Okay.
Maybe I do, maybe I don't.
So the other thing I wanted to ask you, so we do have this static kind of RX app, and as I recall from using Reactive UI in the past, there's basically like an error handler built into this, right? That by default just kind of blows up your app and crashes everything if you don't provide your own implementation.
Oh man, so now you're going to call me on whether or not I did what I was supposed to do. Did I include that? I don't think I did. Yeah, well, this is why the sample's work in progress. Yes, there is a default exception handler, which, okay, so I'm going to butcher this, so please go back and fact check me because I am not a guru. I am a guru in training. There's the concept of observables. So we saw the on complete, on next, and on error. What we do is we kind of intercept errors and then allow you to play that error back on an observable pipeline of itself. So you'll see later that some of the reactive commands actually expose thrown exceptions that you can subscribe to get the unpackaged exception from internal. And what that default exception handler does is basically allow you to set a global breakpoint, do some global, app center logging or, output logging, and it will break the app so that you can kind of look at what happens in the event something in an observable pipeline falls over.
So I'm going to make it internal because why not? So let's just create one right now, right? So we'll say RX error handler, right? So what are we doing here? What do we need to implement?
Let's do that. So let's go to here we go. So I want to say it's going to be iObserver of exception.
Okay.
And then it basically.
So we kind of already looked at this iObserver of exception. So on completed, we don't really care about, right? We don't need to do anything there.
Maybe you want to put a debugger in there, like maybe there's an exception caught, and you want to catch the exception while it's actually completed. On error, you're going to want to catch the exception, and on next, you're going to want to catch the exception. Actually, yeah, on completed, you don't care about because it's just gonna.
Is it like? Because I mean, do we need to actually do something in on error and on next? Like, because I mean, if all I want to do is like, let's just say I want console.writeLine and I'm in my error, right? Like, is it really the on error or is it on the on next?
It's technically in the on next. So the on next is gonna fire.
Because what it says,
you're actually challenging my knowledge of this piece of the.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
It's the default exception handler, right? So, yeah. So that's the iObserver. So RX error handler.
RX error handler. Yep.
That's what we called it. So now my application will be sure every time that we have anything observable, we're going to use this error handler. But yeah, so like I think this is kind of one of those things that I'll be honest, like I never really saw something great. But like I would think it would be on next, wouldn't it? Like because we don't like at next, this point like
next will capture.
Like I would think like the default that Reactive UI would be doing is saying that on error is going to go to the RX default error handler and then publish.
Yes, but there's still a potential while the on next is happening for another exception to surface, which would then surface the on error. So it's kind of a chicken egg scenario. Like, yes, the on next is where you're going to get all of the errors that are coming through this particular error handler because it's observing the exceptions at the global level.
Mm-hmm.
But in the event that there's an error that happens during the on next, then the on error will get fired. And it's on error is basically like your finally block. Think of it that way. Right, so you have your try, your catch, and your finally. Like on error would be your finally. So in the event that something happened and everything just fell over and nothing was working, the on error is going to fire and it's going to give you some information.
Okay, so, but like if we hit on next, we're not going to get on error. Like this is like,
correct.
This is oh shit mode right here.
So, on error is like the sky is falling.
Okay. So Chicken Little has arrived.
Yes.
Okay. So if we're doing this, we want on error and we want on next is what we're saying for our iObserver of exception, and then we're going to pass this into our RX app, and that this will keep us from crashing outright just because we had an error. Now we probably want to do something a little bit better though, right?
Well, let's just go ahead and say that only Sith speak in absolutes. So it will not stop your crashes. It won't stop your iOS SIGBART errors. Like you'll still have
you'll still have crashes, happens. But it won't crash because you had an uncaught exception in your observable pipeline.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
So if we kind of go back here to where were we? I think it was right here. So like, is there a way that like let's say I want something different than our default implementation that just goes to the console?
Yeah, I literally just wrote one of these the other day, so I don't have to write another one ever again. Let me go find that. Because I write a lot of code too, and I write the code and then I forget about the code because it's easier to forget than it is to try and keep it all in my head. That's why I have source control.
Hey, you know, the funny thing is I wrote that entire view model using the Xamarin.Forms MVVM, but at the same time, I completely forgot about something like an entire feature that I wrote for Prism that has been there for months.
Nope, I was disconnected from the live share due to a connectivity problem. Bye-bye. Let's try joining the collaboration session again. So you're going to see my chat window again. Yay. Let's copy the link, close that up, join this session again. So I've got a...
See, did you join?
A default. Yeah, I'm joining again.
Okay.
So I've got a default exception handler, and this is kind of what I generally, I don't know where the best place to post this is. Probably just in the,
well, let's just put it in the,
now?
well, do you want to copy it into the app? I mean, you're on live share.
I have live share, right?
Beautiful, isn't it?
Right. It's like, how do we survive before all of these tools, right?
Well, it's one of those things. I have been complaining basically since the day they announced live share, if I'm honest, that the Visual Studio Mac team does not have any support for that. Like, to me, it is such like, you're the bastard stepchild nobody cares about when all this time later they still don't have support for it.
VS Mac is really just Xamarin Studio that they only keep it around because they have to, not because they want to. I mean, that's the way it feels as a consumer. Yeah. So, okay, now maybe you can see that.
Now I know if you talk to a number of the PMs, and there are a lot of PMs on Visual Studio Mac. I know John Galloway just actually left the .NET Foundation to go over to the Visual Studio Mac team as a PM. You've got Jordan, Matheson, you've got Uni, or what is it? I can't remember. But there are a bunch of the PMs over there, and it's like they'll all tell you that no, like they're all behind it, all supporting it. I'm like, I don't see it. Like, the fact that you guys cannot get the live share team, like, okay, they got allocation for this team to go and do this crazy new thing, but they couldn't take any time. Like, they had to rewrite their entire freaking feature in TypeScript. Like, so Chase in the chat says Rider. So it's funny. I actually use Rider. I've been using Rider for 2+ years now. And I will say that Rider is my IDE of choice on Mac. And I recently started using it on Windows because Visual Studio 2019 did something one day, pissed me off. And I was just like, I'm done with all things Visual Studio. I use VS Code for live share because that experience is candidly better than the VS live share. Yeah.
So, yeah. So, I'm not one to bag on tooling and all that stuff, but I would say that if Rider and VS Mac could get together and make an IDE together, it would be like the king of all IDEs, but that'll never happen. So
yeah, well, I mean, I've been saying too, like if they really truly cared about Visual Studio Mac, they should just pay Matt whatever he wants for Mfractor.
Yes.
Like, I don't care if it's a couple million. Like, pay him what he wants and bring him on board, and
make it better.
And here's like the real key is, don't manage him. Tell him, go do what you do and make our product better, and leave him the hell alone.
Yeah.
Like that.
Go wizard.
Yeah. Just
go wizard.
Just go. Like, just go do your thing, and in like 3 months or less, they would have an amazing product, but they don't want to do that. Anyway.
Well, they're certainly not going to listen to us because,
Oh, what do I know?
So what you see here is basically what I use. Like, the debugger's attached. If the debugger's attached, I break.
Yeah.
And, you don't have to rethrow the error. I am explicitly in here rethrowing the error because, sometimes I want error, sometimes I don't.
Mm-hmm.
But this is just a way to get the debugger to stop on any global exception that happens in an observable pipeline. That way you kind of get a chance to look at what happens before the app crashes and you're standing there. Because I'll say this, trying to debug observable pipelines sometimes can be extremely daunting.
Mm-hmm.
because there's a lot of it's inherently a callback, right? So like I was going back and forth with somebody a couple of months ago that promises, JavaScript promises, observables, the TPL, they're all just basically modeling asynchronous programming, and they're all just a container that something is supposed to then come back to later when it's completed. So it becomes very important that you have somewhere for it to go when it comes back. Otherwise, yeah, there you go. You can put if-defs in there, which, but it's important that you have some place for it to come back to. So there's, it's all just callbacks. It's all really just a callback from back in the early .NET 1.0 days where you used to have to actually define your callback for a function. It's really no different. It's just you've got a lot of niceties, nicer tools, and syntactic sugar around it. So this allows you to break the debugger, verify what's going on before something happens, and see, there you go, being smart, and check out what a given error is inside of an observable pipeline, because the reactive nature of it, the asynchronous nature of it, there'll be things that are happening at the exact same time, and the debugger has to actually process those differently than the actual time that they're happening, because with the pub sub pattern, when the publisher publishes the notification and the subscriber listens, all the subscribers are getting it at the same exact time, the exact same space time. It's not like one gets it, then the next one gets it, and everyone's getting it. So the debugger can't physically do that for you. So one will fire, then another will fire, then another will fire. So this gives you a way to say, hey, something broke, and I don't know where in the pipeline it broke, but because I have this, I attach the debugger and I get the breakpoint, I can now look at the error and see where in the stack trace things are happening.
So yeah, this is actually a really fun one, by the way. Honestly, I've never actually used debugger launch for mobile. But it is something I use on mobile build tools all the time now. Thanks to Kazoo kind of showing me that little miracle.
Nice.
Stupidly powerful, where, the debugger isn't actually launched, but you're running the debug build and it goes, oh crap, I don't know what to do. And all of a sudden now it'll actually let you open Visual Studio or attach to an open instance of Visual Studio and let you debug line by line. Absolutely amazing.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the default exception handler that the RX app gives you. Some other things that the RX app gives you is it gives you our understanding of your platform's main thread scheduler. I want to say the task pool scheduler is on there. So just kind of some things that we know you're going to want that if you had to go write yourself, you would probably open up 15 GitHub issues just to figure out how to get it working. So we're just going to do it for you. And we have some smart logic in there that makes it easier for you to just consume it.
Yeah.
But they all just implement the iScheduler interface, and it just kind of makes it's just, again, one of those things from an MVVM framework that you would expect them to give you niceties to help you along your way.
Definitely. And it's one of those things I always go back to as well, where I try to explain to people, it's like, if you're not using a framework and you're trying to write your own, you're asking for trouble, because these frameworks probably written by someone smarter, or at the very least, people at the same caliber as you, but collectively. Because I can write wonderful code, but when I'm collaborating with other really smart developers, the level of code just goes through the roof, right? And that's not unique to me. That's, unique to every programmer out there. I mean, there are some amazing programmers that have been in chat today. So it's one of those things. Like, collaboration really is king. And it's one of the reasons why I love this live share too. Because it makes it so much easier.
The other thing about that is it's not just collaborating with other developers, but it's also downstream consumers. I write code the way I write code, and not everybody writes code the way I write code, surprisingly. because I'm an opinionated developer.
Yeah.
So
Isn't
my
everyone?
opinions may not jive with yours.
Yeah.
Right. You use XAML. I don't. I use XAML to skin the UI, but that's as far as I go. I do my bindings in
And
code.
Michael Stonis hates XAML with a passion. So.
Oh yes, he and I have had that conversation. Yeah. C# all the way.
Yeah.
C# UI. But what it allows is downstream consumers are actually consuming my MVVM framework, and if I do something that doesn't jive with the overall platform, I've got somebody that may raise an issue and find it for me that I may never have found, or worse, my actual app consumers would have found it and left me a bad review on the App Store. And now I've got somebody just creating a nice GitHub issue that I can fix.
I look at that as part of the collaboration, right? Like, I think so easy, or like so often it's really easy to say that the collaboration is between maintainers. And while that's partially true, it's not limited to that at any degree. Like, it is the collaboration of people using that code base and saying, hey, I'm not really sure about this, or it would be better if it did this, or hey, did you know that you have this bug here? Like all of those little things really kind of come together to make a much, much better product. And it's like when you try to do that on your own, you're asking for trouble.
Yes, you are. Yes, you are.
But all right, so we've spent a lot of time now on this React or RX app. So what else do we have here? So we have these. I'm going to go back to the list page. We had these different events. So we have an item selected. Now does that? Because actually yes, it does. Well, just got to look at the thing, right? So we're not actually invoking anything. We're just like this item selected. We're nulling it out because for whatever bloody reason, I don't know why this isn't a property. I mean, even from the F100, you would think this would be a property by now because everyone's like, all right, fine, let me go set it to null because I don't want to hold on to the thing. I just want to know what was tapped.
Yeah, exactly. So it's funny. So the subscribe actually is allowing you to provide a function. So you're right. We're not invoking an actual reactive command at this point. What we're doing is subscribing to the stream and saying at the end of this stream, when I get an actual value, go do this work.
Yeah.
This is kind of the essence of the functional aspect of the programming is I'm just providing it a function. So this is no different than this. Okay, of course, because I'm not in Visual Studio, it's not going to do all my nice formatting for me.
Yeah.
Yay. So it's basically just a function that I'm passing it, right? I'm just passing it a function, and this is what's happening as a result of the item being selected. I'm just saying I don't care about what the item is, just null the thing out and be done with it.
Definitely. So we have that, but we also have the items tapped, and the item tapped is where we actually invoke a command, because that's where we're like, hey, this is what we care about, and then we're kind of invoking that and passing in. What are we passing in on this here? So we have XViewModel.
Oh, yeah. So I'm explicitly casting the item as the binding context to a view model. I could technically take the event arg, which X is the event arg, from the list. So you've probably all written that behavior property, that event command behavior thing that you had to write in Xamarin.Forms. Like I don't write that.
Well, no, we have it in Prism.
List view. Right, but I mean, like I had to write it when I first started using it. I had to use it. That was 3 years ago now. I don't use it anymore because I just do this. It's way easier. So I'm passing that into the reactive command. So one last thing that I will point out on this page, and one of the other features that I wanted to point out is you'll see on line 27 if you scroll up, because the follow is broken.
Yeah, I don't know what's up with that. I'll try refollowing you because you had to rejoin. Okay, so what do we have here? This inverse Boolean binding.
27. So again, it's a contrived example. I probably wouldn't do this. I would probably just use XAML, but I wanted to explicitly show that one of the key features of using the code bindings is I can now pass a Boolean converter. Now, this does not use the Xamarin.Forms iValue converter stuff. This is reactive UI. It has baked into its binding the ability to convert. So later I'll show you how we can do this inline with just providing a function. And I also gave an example of creating an actual class that will do the type conversion for you. But you can pass that into the code binding, very similar to you could do it in XAML. Pass in the value converter.
Yeah.
But I prefer doing it this way because, again, I can now put a breakpoint in there and see what values are happening. Whereas when I do it in XAML, I'm kind of at the whim of how smart am I that day and how well am I paying attention to what I'm writing.
How much caffeine have you had? Yes.
Never enough. Never enough. But you can do that as an inline function as well. But there's a couple of ways to do it. So we provide that for you, and that's kind of like the meat. Oh, one last thing that's important. It's going to be on line 36. Line 36, what we're saying is search results is what we're actually binding to our observable collection behind the scenes. So line 36 basically shows when there's any value in the observable collection, I'm going to immediately go and bind it to the item source. So I'm explicitly binding any values that get passed in to the item source using code as opposed to the static XAML way of binding your item source.
Now,
this is a
kind of unwrap this for me if you would. So okay. I have my search results. I'm going to assume without looking at the view model that this is some sort of enumerable, right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, are we talking about I'm replacing my search results? Like I'm just saying like new list of, string, blah, 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 like, or new array, whatever. And so I'm completely replacing that property, like the value for that property, or are we talking like I have an observable collection of string and I just added a new string or removed a string or something like that?
So again, when any value deals with the property change notifications, and in this instance, I'm pretty sure it's dealing with the collection change notifications. So what we're doing is anytime that the collection changes, we're going to bind.
Okay. So this is I added or I removed things.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So it just defers the binding until there's actually values in it to bind, as opposed to binding it up front and then popping values in. Again, it's very reactive. It's basically saying I'm not going to do any work until there's a reason for me to go to do work. I'm not just going to go do work for the sake of doing work.
Okay.
And when we run the sample, this will make a lot more sense because there's actual search results. You'll see we're doing some RX magic to look at the text properties and take that value and do some work with it. So that'll make sense in a little bit.
Okay. Gotcha. All right. Where to next?
Okay. So the last piece that I want to talk about, the last piece of magic that I want to talk about is going to be on the detail page.
The detail page. Okay.
Yes. The NuGet package detail page, XAML.cs.
Okay.
So I'm in this page. Here we go. So the only piece of stuff that's different here is going to be here, line 43 through 46.
Okay.
What I'm doing here is I'm basically saying when the view model instantiates and when there's a value here, go invoke this command, right? So the where not null basically says where the notified property isn't null, go do some work. This is a trick that I use on the UI to go. So you know how we've all been upset that in a constructor we can't go fire off a task and go get some data, right? But that's the place where you would think to do it because that's when everything is instantiating. So you want to go and go get your data so that your user doesn't have to then go wait after the page has been created, bound to go do that work. What this is basically saying is the second that there's a value, go and execute this command. So I use this trick when the UI starts up and the view model gets a value, go get data. Don't wait.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
So there used to be, and I don't know if it's still there. There's another way to do this. You can do like a select many and do a execute on the. So let's just show, right? So here you can do like a dot select many x such that x dot view model. Let's be smart. Execute. So you can do it this way, and it'll more or less produce the same result. I've gotten into explicitly invoking the command and using the command because the main difference between, like you said earlier, invoking the command and doing the subscribe is the invoke command is inherently execution safe, meaning that if it's currently in flight, it won't fire off another execution. Whereas the subscribe, every single time something happens, that subscribe is firing. It doesn't matter if there's something in flight, something out of flight. If it's deallocating, reallocating, it's going because we're ready to go. So I explicitly use invoke command because I got bit when I first started RX, I got bit by a bug that I created because I didn't know this thing, and I was firing off a subscribe to go get change notifications. So we were doing real-time notifications. Every time a notification came in from the server, all the remotes needed to go back to the server to get fresh data using offline sync, right? So everybody, hey, there's a change to this particular endpoint. Everybody go get new data. What was happening was I was using subscribe, and it was firing every single time, and those notifications were coming in every second. So I was basically sending off a whole bunch of network requests and eating up a whole bunch of memory and breaking my consumers. And it was very bad. So I changed it to invoke command. I did some magic around the throttling and increased the performance and made some folks very happy. But this is just a trick that we use in RX to go get data when the view is loading. And it works pretty well because the second that the view model has a value, this fires off because the notify property change happens. So the property change happens, and we're good to go.
So let's just take a look at this detail here. So where is that getting set? Where is that value getting set here? So I think it was this package search metadata is what you were looking at, right?
Yeah, the package search metadata is actually on the view model. So let's go to the view model. Of course, my IntelliSense is not working, and none of my tools are working the way I expect them to. So I'll have to do it manually. Okay, so I should just be following you. Yeah, so this iPackage search metadata is actually out of the NuGet library. What I did was, again, I take contrived examples. I took our WPF sample and just ported it to Xamarin.Forms.
Yeah.
So our WPF sample shows how you would do predictive search, predictive search as well as search with a throttle in a search bar. So what I'm doing is I'm basically saying, hey, when you've given me the name of the package, I'm going to go search NuGet and bring back the package details. The list view will actually bring back all of the packages that meet the initial search criteria. And the reason why I put this detail page in is explicitly to show how to go get data when the page is loading, because then what I'm going to do is go back and get all of the version information for that package and then display that on the details page. So then you can see, the last 30 versions of this particular package on the detail page.
So some things I would change on this right off the bat, because we're just how you want to do it is, first of all, I would use iNinitialize, not iNavigation aware. Okay. Because actually what you would want is you would want to do this before we've pushed, right? So now we have our initialize. So the difference is with onNavigated to, this is, I've created the page, we have our view model, and now I've said, push this page async, right, with Xamarin.Forms navigation. And so now that this has already been pushed in the framework, so it's theoretically already visible before I'm actually calling onNavigated to. So you get some gains here in going to the initialize. There's also something that you can do here as well. I'm still working on the video on it, so it's not public yet. But you can also do iNinitialize async, which is really great. So the key in this, as I'm sure you can figure out pretty quick, is if you're doing something asynchronously, you have to wait for it to finish.
Generally.
Yes, that's kind of the idea, right?
Yeah,
if you're saying, "Oh wait,"
it, but,
you're actually saying, let me know when you're done, and then I'll keep working.
Exactly.
So that's basically what the Prism navigation service does. So when we have a view model that implements I initialize async, we're going to let you do your entire initialization asynchronously. So you can go out and you can hit your API. I mean, this is basically what it's written for, right? So you can go out, you can hit your API asynchronously. You can wait for it to come back and finish and do everything that you needed it to do. And then the beautiful part there is that now your view model is completely initialized, and now we've taken that page and said push async with the Xamarin.Forms navigation. So
that's pretty nice.
when you first see it, now everything is done. The caveat to that is you're doing something asynchronously, so you just did something that you expected navigation as a user, and I'm now programmatically delaying that execution, right? So you have to do something visually on where you navigate from, so that way the user doesn't think that the app locked up or isn't responding.
Right.
Gotcha. That's like the caveat, right? But that's not my responsibility as a framework maintainer to do like that, because I can't. Like, only you can decide how that needs to be implemented for your app.
Right.
So.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good information.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I would do that very differently there. One other thing I'm just kind of thinking before we end up merging this would be. Yeah. So we have a page that is showing how to use the reactive UI bindings. We have some of the pharmacy stuff, the pharmacist stuff. And what I would also do is have at least one of the pages where we do conventional Xamarin.Forms bindings.
Okay.
So that way we can see the different flavors. Like, so you don't have to have the, like, it's not an opinionated thing that you have to do the reactive UI bindings, and it's not opinionated that you have to do Xamarin.Forms. Like, you can choose how you want this to be. And so you take your preferences and then and your needs, right? Like, because there are going to be certain circumstances where it just makes more sense to use the reactive UI bindings than,
right.
So just my 10 cents or whatever you want to call it.
No, that's a good point. And that's a thing. Like, I try very hard not to be dogmatic about anything. I'm never going to be the one that says you should always do something one way. I'm very much solve the problem.
Yeah.
Solve the problem the way that makes the most sense. Solve the problem the path of least resistance. Solve the problem. So that's actually some really good feedback. That's we can get that in. That's not a problem.
Yeah. Well, I know it's not a problem. So perfect. Is there anything else that we should go over before I try to actually build this, or?
At this point, probably not. I think we've talked about everything that I had on my list. I actually do have a list over here of things that I wanted to make sure that I discussed. So I talked about inline and explicit type conversion. I talked about my download trick.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody in chat has any questions. If you do, definitely feel free to ask the questions. I mean, while we have the expert here, I mean, let's definitely pick his brain and make him work for his money that we're not paying him.
Right. Well, the segue that you can always find me in the Reactive UI Slack. I'm there anytime I'm not sleeping. Notifications come through on every last device that I own. So, if you have questions, we've got a pretty healthy community of people that have been doing RX for a long time. So feel free to jump in, ask whatever questions you want. Find me on Twitter, find me wherever, ask questions, because the more I can help individuals understand functional programming, the more we can spread this joy.
So, it's funny you mentioned that, because I think that I pinged you the other night or maybe you pinged me. I can't remember. One of us pinged the other one though, and it was like I think midnight my time, and I'm like, wait a second, you're like 2 hours off of me. Like, good God, do you ever sleep? Like, people ask me that question, and now I'm having to ask you. Like,
Yeah, so I'm chasing Glenn. Glenn is literally a time lord. He exists. He exists 17 hours in the future, and
yeah,
he's still kind of space age to me.
yeah,
Like I thought I didn't sleep, but yeah, he doesn't. So I sleep when required. The problem is there's so many problems to solve that my
definitely.
brain doesn't want to stop trying to solve them. So it's just easier to kind of fall like half doze off in my chair and then wake up and be like, oh, I've got the answer, and
Yeah.
rather than actually go to sleep.
So the other question for people watching, if they're not part of the reactive or the RX chat, like how do they join the Slack channel there?
So currently you've got to message either myself, Glenn, or Anna to get access because we had somebody spam the chat not too long ago.
Mm-hmm.
But you can go to the Reactive UI GitHub. You can go to reactiveui.net. We'll provide links for all that, and the Slack invitation link should be there. So just come and join.
So let's just pull this
It's
up here. So we,
yeah,
well,
sure.
actually, I think
Let's do that.
we're already on the GitHub. I think, right? So,
Yeah.
so where do I go here? So there's
Oh
this
goodness.
reactiveui.net about. There's hello at reactiveui.net. Like, do I just
Yeah.
email hello at reactiveui.net? Say, hey, give me
Uh,
access.
so right now you've got to either message myself, Glenn, or Anna to get in. But normally that link, where's the Slack link? Come on, there we go. There's one at the top of the README right above the logo, chat Slack. You just click on that,
Where?
and it's going to of course authenticate me. Yeah, that's where you go to get an invite. So hold on, let me look at the. So okay, go to Reactive UI. Sorry,
Oh,
the
yeah,
the,
okay,
the
yeah, yeah,
project. No, the actual pin repository, Reactive UI.
yeah, yeah. I did.
Oh, okay. Because there's a delay, so
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm brilliant at these things.
It's all good. Yeah, I'm doing
And
something that you can't see in real time. So, yeah, no worries.
it's okay. I can see things everywhere. That's why I have these glasses. Um, so right above the logo, there's a whole bunch of shields. The last shield is an invitation to Slack. Right now, like I said, it's disabled, but that's where you would go to request an invite to Slack.
Okay, but it's no longer enabled. So that doesn't work. Um, so how should people ping you guys? Like on Twitter or something, or
Yeah, find me on Twitter at rlittles2, at Glenn Coder. I forget Anna's handle at the moment. Um,
okay,
but you can find us on Twitter or any social media outlet. Find us on GitHub and send us an email. Whatever, however you need to find us, we're out there.
okay. Let's see
Yeah,
here.
we had to disable it.
So there's Anna right there. Jeff. Let's see. Where's I think I have to like actually expand it here for everyone else or for you guys. Do, 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 do. So I guess you guys aren't public. You like to hide yourselves. You're not proud of the
Uh,
fact that you're part of the organization.
oh, it's funny. So I'm weird about stuff like that. Like I don't like to. I don't think I'm anybody special. So putting all that stuff up there, just people with their badges and their
Okay,
titles and their special feelings. I'm not one of
gotcha.
those people. Like so no, I don't necessarily display it proudly, but I mean everywhere you go, I'm talking about reactive functional programming
Definitely.
or functional reactive programming.
But
So
like
yeah,
if they email hello at Reactive UI, they're gonna hit somebody that can help
yeah,
them. So okay.
yeah. Somebody will get to them. Yes.
Okay. So let me do a couple things here. I'm gonna change over to a simulator so I can have it showing up, and then I'm gonna see what I broke because I'm sure we had to have broken something with all of this typing we did, right?
No, man, slam F5 and it's all just gonna work.
That almost never works. The 12th.
So I remember the first time in my career that I sat down, wrote an entire feature, like days worth of code, slammed F5, and it worked the first time. No error, no break, no nothing. Like the feature actually worked. That was like the first time. It was 5 years in, and I'm like, oh my God, I've achieved a new level. And then the very next day, everything fell apart. It's like, oh no.
Okay, still building. You know, this kind of reminds me. So I had gone down, and I have a boat that's on a mooring, right? And so I have to take a small boat out to the big boat, and I go down, and I start up the engine on the dinghy, fires off right off, no problem. That thing is running like a champ, and I unhook from the dock, and the engine dies. I'm like, oh. No, I couldn't get it. Couldn't get it. Like I couldn't get it running. Like I rebuilt the carb. I did like everything. I'm like, oh man. I'm actually a lot more mechanically inclined than most people think, but I very rare. Like I only go to mechanics when I feel lazy. Like that's basically been my motto since I was a kid.
I get it.
Of course, the reason has changed over the years. Like when I was a kid, it was because I was poor, and now it's because I'm lazy. So
yeah. So line 35 is probably going to blow up because there's no more base on navigated to because you changed it to initialize.
Oh no, there's still a base on navigated to.
Really?
Okay. Because that's coming from your base class. So it definitely would be a bug. 100% would be a bug, but it would technically work.
Oh, and you call me a wizard.
The other thing is this is an empty implementation, so there's actually no reason to have it.
Really?
Like, because you're not invoking anything from the base class. Like, if you were trying to maintain something, then yeah, there would be a reason to do it. It's going to be one of those builds, for crying out loud. All right, I guess let me try to kill it.
Okay. Of course, you change too many things, so it can't just work.
No. Well, it'll work. It'll just take like a half an hour to build. You know, it's like, unfortunately, like either Pierce is not on today or he's watching incognito and doesn't want anyone to know he is. So I'll just make fun of him either way, though. But he be like, yeah, dude, your stuff is broken again.
Oh, goodness.
Pierce is a good guy, though. So let me see here. So one of the things, like the Xamarin.Forms application class, right, gives us some different methods, like on start, okay, you know, on, what is it, override, on resume. Technically, Prism doesn't care about on start, okay? So you can do this because, like, what the application class, like the Xamarin.Forms application class, it's just an empty virtual method. You know, that way you have a place to write code you need to. So you don't need to invoke the base. But when you're using Prism, we actually do have code in there because we don't have anywhere else to put it. Like, there's not a method we could handle this with. So you, like, if you're using Prism application, you do have to have like base on resume or base on sleep. Those do have to be called.
Okay.
So just kind of an FYI. Totally random.
So I generally, if it's virtual, I just call it anyway. If it's abstract, you'll get a compiler error. So if I don't get a compiler error, I'm calling the base class. It's just safer that way because I've done that before where I've written some levels of inheritance and something is not working, and then I go back and look like, oh, I'm smart. I did that in the base class, and I'm not calling anything up the chain. That's why it doesn't work.
Wow, it actually did build though. Imagine that. I'm impressed.
Oh man, so am I.
I thought for sure I took a semicolon away or didn't add one I should have.
Oh, I'm sure.
I mean, I love that that little meme that's like, programming is just like writing a book, except if you forget a comma when writing a book, people can still read the book.
Well, people can still read your code. The compiler can't.
Yeah, and that's what's important, though.
uh, I guess the compiler would be. Yeah, I guess yeah. I guess the syntax is just a little bit more strict, huh? The editor won't release it at all for public consumption.
Yeah.
Until you get your syntax right.
Something like that. Okay, come on. Let me grab you and drag you. Okay. Might sound a little awkward. I don't know.
It's quite all right.
Okay. Log in with Facebook? No, I don't like Facebook. I don't trust them.
No, don't log in with any of that stuff. All that stuff is just kind of there.
Oh, okay. So what are we putting in here?
So
bar?
At this point,
nobody look at my password. God, this thing is slow.
But I want your password so I can see all your things.
Should probably put a title on here, no? Now I'm nitpicking your design.
Like I said, I basically just copied and pasted that code because I've written UI login page samples so many times. It's just like, let me take a clean UI.
Okay, so let's search for a NuGet package. Let me think of a good NuGet package. Okay. There's got to be a good one out there I can do. I know. How about this one? I think this is an awesome NuGet package. Do you use this one? I hear the author is kind of a prick, but you know.
No accounting for taste.
I will say, while I completely wish that these download numbers were true all the way down, that's definitely a bug.
Oh yeah, so getting data out of the metadata packages for NuGet was somewhat fun. That's not the right download numbers. It's like based upon the API, it's supposed to give me the right values, but I just let that be a bug. Somebody can fix it later and tell me, Rodney, you're stupid. You're supposed to get it from here instead of there. Well, thanks.
Okay, Rodney, you're stupid. You're supposed to get it from here instead of there. Oh, sorry.
Appreciate it. Glad we got that out.
But yeah, some titles would be cool though. Just make it look a little nicer. That's pretty simple though. But you know, I noticed as I was typing here, and I'm still typing, right? So it had a huge delay. Like it made sure I was done typing. Like I could sit here and do whatever I want, and it really made sure to wait. So I like that. That's very cool. And it didn't take much code for you to do that.
No, it's literally just one operator. Remember earlier we talked about, RX is all about applying operators over streams.
Yes.
So basically what I did was I said, use a throttle operator. Throttle is going to wait for notifications until the time span is up, and then it's going to emit everything. So it's going to make sure that you're done typing. And then after you're done typing, it's going to take everything in that stream, and it's going to go ahead and look for something.
Yes.
So it basically just ensures that you don't have to process. This is the main thing I tell people about events. When you're dealing with an event handler, you as the developer are responsible for processing every single event that comes off that handler. When I use RX to process the events on an observable, I can time shift those events and only deal with events when I, the developer, choose to. So I have a lot more power over when I see events, when I do work as a result of the event firing. I can apply all the standard link operators. I can apply take. I can apply skip. So I can skip the first method invocation or the first event handler invocation and only take the second. Like all of these things become available to me where that's logic you would have to write yourself against an event handler to make sure that you only process every third keystroke, or wait till there's 10 items in the list before you actually go and do work. I can just do that with a .throttle or a .buffer. And it's easy to read, it's systematic, and it's the same across all RX. So RxJS, RxJava, RxCoca, RxSwift. Anywhere, any language that uses Rx that respects the reactive extensions, there's going to be a operator that does similar to what you're used to in another language, and you can use it and take that knowledge with you across languages.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well,
Anyway.
this is absolutely fantastic. Like I said, probably a couple small changes there. One other thing I might suggest on the sample is, why don't we maybe add something that nobody ever adds to their code, and just kind of do some comments, just to kind of explain a little bit, like especially like for the pharmacist stuff, right? Like kind of what we're doing, why we're doing it. So we can kind of, just make like a comment like, that this is using reactive UI bindings instead of Xamarin.Forms, right? Kind of like that kind of thing.
Yeah, you beat me to the punch. I actually planned on providing comments at every line where there's an operator that may or may not cause some controversy, so that people can just look at the code and read the comments and try and get understanding. I actually even think I'm going to link out to the RX docs.
That would be
For the
fantastic.
different operators. Yeah, I plan on doing that because I know. So when I first jumped into reactive programming, I literally spent 4 months breaking my brain trying to think functionally, think declarative. How does this work? And it really does take a paradigm shift in the way you think. No longer am I telling the code to set this value, mutate this state. I'm saying when the state changes, go do some work. It's very autonomous. So it takes a while. There's a learning curve involved. So I understand that learning curve. And as somebody that has struggled with that learning curve, I'm trying to find ways to lessen that curve for those people that come behind me, because I would look at that code. I had somebody look at some of that code and say, Rodney, none of this makes sense. Like, I mean, it makes sense, but none of it makes sense. And it's just like, okay. And then when you stop and you break it down, it's like, oh, this is just simple link. It's just like, exactly. It's link over events. Just like you have link to SQL, just you have like link to entities. It's link over events. It's link over tasks. It's link over observables. It's just give me a steady stream of data that's going to give me some completion notification in the future. And until it completes, I'm going to continue to get stuff and do work.
Yeah. Yeah, no, this is absolutely fantastic. So I'm really looking forward to the PR. I think this is really going to help answer so many questions that people have. So like I said, thank you so much for putting in all this time and jumping on here and kind of going through it, walking through it for the community. So I know there are a lot of people that, whether they were able to join live or whether they catch the recording, this is definitely going to help a lot of people that are trying to figure this kind of stuff out.
Good. And candidly, I hope it spawns more questions. The more questions we have, the harder I have to think, the more I have to dig into my knowledge, the better off the community, benefits. So
Definitely
ask the questions. If it doesn't make sense, if you think it's stupid, tell me. I'm not above being wrong or listening or learning a new way.
Definitely.
Definitely.
Yeah. Well, thank you everybody for joining, and I hope you've enjoyed this as much as I have, and we'll definitely catch you guys later. Thank you so much. Hey, Dan here. Hope you enjoyed another wonderful episode. Be sure to hit subscribe and like so I can keep bringing you even more great content.